easy as 1, 2, 3. You can make it fit you and me. You can put it on your head or hang it on your knee. Watch this video and you will see just how easy it can be.
Aloha! Again, we are going to be talking about steaming felt. And basically, there's a few differences, but basically steaming felt is the same as steaming straw. So I will talk more about steaming felt just because the same basic techniques are used for straw, but there are just a few things to think about with straw, and I'll get to that later. But let's talk first about felt. You've either purchased a hood like this, or you have purchased a cape line or cartwheel, which is like this. You see how it's got kind of a flare to it? Sometimes people call them flares. Or you have a full body hat. Of course, these cost the most, but the nice thing about full body hats is that you can actually have both a brim and a crown. You might be able to get a tiny bit of a brim with a flare or a cartwheel, but you won't get as much as if you are using a full body. And then this is a hood. The hoods are basically great for doing cloches, you know, the 1920s flapper style hats, and those never go out of fashion. You can look on Amazon and find lots of cloches because they're just so stylish. And if you get two hoods of the same color, you can cut up one hood to decorate your steamed hood, and that can be really kind of great. And you can see some examples of that in Denise Drayer's chapter. And I hope you do look at the chapter, although I am trying to follow the chapter as much as possible, at least to keep me organized, and so you don't go crazy with Deb Bell going onto tangents, or at least that's what I'm trying to do. So, what can we say first of all about felt? You know, actually felt is made from piles of fiber. And the fiber, I kid you not, I've never seen it, but it's been described to me as piles of fiber that are like stacked up like this. And then a machine comes and squishes it all down with hot steam. And so it just kind of just goes into this kind of shape. What's neat about that? Well, you don't have any raw edges like you have with fabric. You know, you do have a raw edge, but it doesn't fray like fabric does because all those fibers have been kind of nailed into each other. And the other neat thing about felt is that it doesn't have a grain line. Remember how we talked about the grain line with buckram? And when you start stretching it over a head block, and you stretch this hood over a head block in the same way. With the buckram, you really wanted to figure out where you wanted optimum stretch, and you would put the buckram bias in line with where you wanted the optimum stretch. But felt, it does stretch and it does shrink, especially the better quality felts, but it doesn't have a bias, and so however you put this on here is fine. You know, it doesn't have a center front and center back. Although, take out your pencils and write this down, you do want to mark your center front and center back on your felt hood once you start steaming it, once you get it to a shape that you want. Because remember, this is not a perfect sphere, it's an egg shape. So if you keep steaming it, you know, and you don't keep steaming it with center front and center back, I like to do it with a safety pin. I just put a safety pin on the center front and center back. Then you can just align that with the marking that you have on your head block, center front and center back, and you'll continue to shape and steam with that egg shape so that you're not contradicting the shape of the felt. I mean, if you do it this way with this steaming, and then you do it this way with this steaming, then you're getting that egg shape compromised. I guess that's a way to say it. Now, what are some ways to think about felt? Well, you know, the quality of felt, there's several characteristics. Denise Drayer talks about its elasticity. And what she means by elasticity is how easy is it to stretch. Those of you that got cheaper hoods that are like $12, probably have a felt, I hope it's wool. I mean, if it's not wool, then you better hang it up. But, I mean, you better just not even try to steam it. But the lesser quality felts do not have the same kind of elasticity. And so you might find it more challenging. You might have to have a little bit more elbow grease when you're actually trying to steam it. Now, a good quality felt also has density. When I say density, higher quality felts have a thicker quality to them. I call it plush. This is a marvelous example of a little bit higher quality plush felt. I'm sorry you can't see it with a camera. I'm sure it's not showing. But there is a bit of a raised surface in this. When I move my hand over it, it's almost like when you do a lawnmower over the grass and there's an indentation to it. Whereas you're not going to have that plushness with a less expensive hood felt hat. The plush ones can get very expensive. Think $50, maybe even more. So that might break your budget. And don't fret, because you can get a lot out of these cheaper ones. But you should know what you're paying for sure. Another characteristic besides elasticity and density is its pliability. And again, the pliability is just talking about how easy is it to stretch, how pliable, how movable is it when you're steaming it. And then finally, the last two qualities are the weight. If the felt is heavier, that means it's more dense. And so if it's denser and heavier, that's going to be a higher quality felt. And then finally, it's just the beauty of it. There's some felt that just seems kind of flat, whereas others have that velour quality, that raised surface quality. And so, keep that in mind. We've talked about the hood, we've talked about the flare, we've talked about the body. Another type of felt that you can find hardly ever these days, maybe on Amazon, certainly not at Joann Fabrics. This is too loud. It's upstaging me. But you can also get felt in terms of yardage. And of course, that's just a long yard, flat yard of felt. But basically, most of the stores where you can get felt like that, sometimes Denise Dreyer calls it fun felt, and she spells it P-H-U-N, fun felt. That kind of felt, it doesn't stretch hardly at all. Well, I mean, especially if it's got polyester in it, and most of the felts today are let's just say they fall short of the glory of God. So I would not recommend using yardage felt unless you are using the felt as a flat pattern. Think of a Robin Hood cap. And there's a picture of a Robin Hood cap in Denise Drayer's book. And you can cut that hat out with a couple of flat planes of felt and then stitch them together, and you've got a marvelous felt hat. It's just not steamed, and it's not shaped in the traditional way that you use felt. You could also do that same Robin Hood cap with a heavyweight fabric as well. Do be careful about getting yardage felt. Don't expect too much from it. Now, she talks about how you can shape felt by flat patterning, which we just talked about, or by blocking it, and we're going to be demonstrating that in just a minute. And then you can also shape it by hand. And what she means by that is that if you take your Sussman steam iron over there, and you take and you've got a section of your hat where you want a little bit more of a curve to your felt, you can take the steamer. You can take this steamer or an iron and put a damp cloth between the iron and the felt so you don't mark it, and then steam and hopefully kind of shape that felt just a little bit by hand rather than blocking it, rather than putting it on an actual block. Okay? She also talks about the fact, and this is very important, and it's easy to forget, so underline this with your pencil. Just like with buckram, you have your push pins which control the felt as you're putting it into your balsa head block. And if you get we all know how hard it is to push these pins in this block, so this probably is not a problem for you. But if you push this pin in too far, and you push it so that it's squeezing onto the felt itself, when you steam this, you're going to create a push pin mark on your felt, and you can't really get it out. So be careful about, how far you push in your push pins. Most people don't push them in that far anyway because it's so hard to pull them out. You also have 3 basic stitches that she talks about. And I'm just going to refer you to page 17 because a picture's worth 1,000 words. And on page 117, she shows a darning stitch, an overcasting stitch, and a grafting stitch, all of which can help you shape the felt once it's blocked. If you're adding another layer of felt, adhering another layer to the layer that you've already shaped. Or maybe you're creating an extension of some sort as part of the brim. These are some handy felt stitches, and I think if you look at the picture, I'm convinced that every single one of you are probably very capable of doing these stitches. Unless you're dealing with carpal tunnel syndrome, there's a couple of people in our class that might find it better to find an alternative to doing some of these more cumbersome stitches. I'll let you all be the judge of that. Now, if you don't have a steamer at home, you probably don't, I certainly don't. If you don't have a steamer like this, or a Jiffy steamer, which is a traditional millinery steamer, what you can do is, I have used tea kettles before. They're not great. And remember that if you have if you have concentrated steam rather than spread out steam like this from a tea kettle, just be careful that you don't burn the felt. That's a very important thing. But you can have some limited progress with a tea kettle if you want to try that. I also wanted to remind you, because this is on the millinery quiz, that there are different kinds of hats, right? We've worked on buckram, we've worked on wireframe. We will hopefully, in some pitiful fashion, if not now, at some point later in our lives, work with blocking felt. And then, of course, there's also cloth hats. And these are some examples of some darling cloth hats, and they're just where you shape the fabric. I think Megan wanted to do a cloth hat, or maybe it was Claire, or maybe it was Tasha who wanted to do a newsboy hat with the brim. Those are fabric hats. This, you guys, cast your eyes on a vintage Lily Daché cloth hat and feast your eyes on this. This is all cloth, and you can see that there's a pattern for the top. You can see on the inside it's got facing, so you can't see the seams. She's got an inside facing as well, and it's a tailored facing, not the kind of facing that we were doing for our sailor hats. And look at this gorgeous, the brim has all the stitching. The white is stitched to the black fabric, and then it's all given shape and substance by this countless machine stitched rows that give it its shape. And then she has this fabulous sweatband in here, which is gorgeous, 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 except because it was mass produced, it's got a machine stitched sweatband around it. And then the label says Dachette, made by Lily Daché. So I hope you guys are having fun reading your Lily Daché book. If not now, sometime very soon. Okay, now we'll talk about head blocks. We're already familiar with our basic balsa block, and this is what most of you, when you're shaping your hoods, this is probably the one that will be most effective for you to create into a cloche of some sort. The cloche, remember, is like a flapper head, 1920s, fitting close to the head shape. This is a balsa head block, but there's other blocks as well. You might want to try a brim block, and we've got this brim block But we've also got this picture hat brim block over here. Either one are, they're terrific to experiment with. And you can see how with this brim block, you can put it this way on top of this, and make sure that the head block fits the brim block. If this is a 23 inch and this is a 22 inch, you're going to have some problems. So make sure that they fit. You can see that there's a little bit of a distance here, but it does fit. It does fit because it's there. You couldn't get any closer to this. You could make a hat like this where the brim is bending downward, or you can also shape it like this, and then if you've got a felt body that you've shaped, then you can pull the body part and make the brim go up. So that could be something really fun to experiment if you have a body felt to work with to begin with. You're not going to be able to do that if you're using a felt hood. We have some other hats. We've got quite a few of these in stock. I'm not a big fan of these. I warn you in advance. I mean, if you want to use these, go ahead, go with God. You might have better luck with them than I do. What I find problematic about them is that they are very hard to push. Oh, actually that one pushes in really easily. I wonder if I'm confusing this with one of the others because there was one that was very similar to this that I had to have a hammer to put it in. But this one is actually working quite well. So, just test out your blocks with your push pins in advance. Don't get stuck. This is a terrific head block because it's shaped in the shape of a man's fedora or Homburg. And you can see how, it's got the indentations in the front. This would be center back. And then it's got this wonderful shape here, which is called telescoping. And the telescoping you get by, when you're steaming it, you're putting this on like this, and you're pulling it out, and you get it to steam into, and then you just keep steaming and steaming. Now, this might be a good time to talk about sizing, because a lot of milliners, traditional millers, recommend that you size the hat on the inside, avoid the sizing on the outside, but size it on the inside and then steam it. I recommend that you avoid that because the sizing that is out there is very hazardous to your health. It literally kills brain cells. We used to use some of it every now and then, but we would always spray it outside. And I'm very cautious and hesitant about spraying it indoors and then, steaming and shaping it. But when you size it on the inside, you get a much stiffer, stronger shape. But you don't really need that. A lot of these hats will keep their shape very nicely with just a little bit of steaming. And if you've telescoped that correctly, and you can kind of see that from the chapter in the book, you're just steaming and shaping and pressing and shaping it with your hands, to keep that, and then you can just put your push pins in. Again, don't push them out all the way. You don't want to mark up your felt, but you can, they can help hold that in place for you as you shape and do the rest of it. I got a little sidetracked there. I should stay with Denise Dreher's chapter, but I did want to point that out, the telescoping, and we do have some blocks like that. We also have a very few what are called puzzle blocks. And these are called puzzle blocks because they all come apart. And they come apart so that when you've steamed your hat, see this has positive and negative space. Oh, it looks like there's a crack there. Oh, that's sad. But after you've steamed it, there's no way to pull the hat up. So you can just slip parts of it. You can slip parts of it up and remove the whole thing, and then pull these out. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it, but it'll make sense if you start working with it. We have a few of these. They're from the 30s. I think we have one from the 1940s. If you use this to steam, I encourage you not to use the sizing on the inside. Amy has some liquid sizing that she likes. and you might, but you have to paint it on the inside, and you would want to paint it after you've steamed it. Don't paint it before you steam it, because then you get the blocks all full of junk, and there'd be practically no way to tape this up the way we've taped our trusty balsa blocks. So let's take care of our precious materials. So that's all there is about head blocks. So I think we're about ready to actually steam this felt. Okay, so we're back. We're going to use Jacqueline's hood here. So what I just did was I split it in half, and I put a smaller safety pin for center front and a larger one, because center back is always so important for almost anything, because our grosgrain ribbon meets at center back, etc. So I've got a longer safety pin for center back. And so we've got this hood ready to be steamed and stretched. One thing to have in mind is a 1-inch elastic that can help to control your hood once you get it to a point where you like it. You need a plastic bag, because you want to steam it so that both the inside and the outside of the felt is being moisturized. So if you put it into a steamer, and then you put it over here, either over your steamer or over your Jiffy steamer, one or the other. Close up the bottom so that you can get a whole lot of steam in there. You don't want it to be wet like you dunked it in water, but you also don't want to melt the plastic, so it is a kind of a balancing act. But as you can see, I'm holding this in. I'm getting it really, really wet and steamed and hot. Ooh, and don't burn yourself. I'm taking, this is center back, this is center back, this is center front, and I'm putting this on here, and I'm pulling on it. I pull on it this way, and I pull on it center front to center back, and the more I pull on it, the more it will start to shake. And right now, I'm just going to do this part right here and see if I can't get this top part really nicely. There's a little bit of a bump there. So I'm going to try to get that bump out. Remember that you are bigger than it is. And you might need to do this several times. The neat thing about the felt is that, this is only $12, but it's being fairly pliable. I'm getting some of that bump out by just steaming it more. And let's do it again. Sometimes you can take a wet, damp cloth and have I would suggest a Sussman steam iron if you don't have a steamer, and put a damp cloth over there, because again, you're trying to keep the felt wet as you're shaping it. Okay, I'm getting pretty happy with that. But what we now want to do is get this to shape to this head block as much as we possibly can. And the way you do that, if you stretch vertically, if you stretch this way, if you're pulling on it on the from a vertical direction, the felt, in theory, if it's good quality felt, should shrink. And as it shrinks, it's kind of like the buckram when you were getting out the folds of the buckram. When it shrinks, it will adhere closer to the block, and so you'll get some of this excess out. If you stretch it this way, then it creates a flare. So this is when you stretch it this way if you want it to add more. Now you can't add a lot, it's felt. It won't stretch like buckram does. on the bias, but it will stretch and flare out, and that's sometimes what people do when they're working on their brim part, or if they're doing decorations. You can cut off some of your felt, and if you're stretching it this way, then you get this kind of flare quality to it. Vertical stretching will shrink it, and horizontal stretching, even if you're horizontal stretching up here, it will stretch the fabric this way. Now what we want to do is, we're trying to get that adhered closer to the head block. So let's steam this a little bit more and see how much we can do. I'm going to see what I should do. Yeah, and this is the same thing as the steamer over here. And you have to work fairly quickly, as you can see. Because you can. Okay, so now I'm going to really pull on that this way, and I'm going to really, while it's really wet. We got it to shrink a little bit. Eventually we'll get it close enough that we can actually put this elastic band on it. But do keep in mind that sometimes this elastic band can mark the felt, just like the push pin, so make sure that you're careful with it. And you can do this, several times. You might want to kind of move the felt around as you're going so that you really get that steam equidistant. Again, I'm looking at keeping my large safety pin, and we're going to do this again. Now I'm just trying to, stretch it equidistant. Might not be time to do this yet, but let's just see. Okay, and I'm going to have it close to the edge of the table so that I can be in a position to really pull and stretch it and shrink. You see how much we got out? See how it's like buckram, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But you don't have to worry about a grain line. It's going to do the same thing all over, or it's not going to do the same thing all over. And we're just going to go all around that hat. Now, look at the difference between this side and that side. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can see how we took the elastic off, and we've gotten this very nicely shrunk. We could shrink it even more by just continuing to pull on it. Let's see if we can. See how wonderful that is? You can feel it stretching. You can feel that felt just, closing in on itself. now, it probably would be good to let it cool down just a little bit, but because of time, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up. Remember that this is center back, this is center front, and so look how wonderfully that fits on the head. And now you are ready to cut it anywhere you want, and then you've got all the rest of this as trim possibilities. You could cut it off like this and then create, various designs like that, or even smaller ripples. You could create designs like that. You could take this and put it around millinery wire. Does that make sense? And stitch it with a zipper foot, and then have that to be all kinds of interesting designs on top, making a floret or a cabochon on here once you get this all cut down. Or at this point, you might think about pulling up on a section and steaming that. What if you did a band? And this is where it's helpful to do it on somebody else's head, obviously. You might want to create the top part as a band and then steam all this down like this. I don't know what I look like. Let me see. Anyway, so that you have a band like this, and then you can either cut this away. Usually you have to keep the back, you have to trim the back up fairly high at the nape of the neck in order for it to sit comfortably on your head. If you have too much business, I've got this thing on, you have too much business back there, you're not going to be able to move your head. So that tends to have to be cut at least to where my finger is. But you can shape this whole thing into a brim, or you could have it asymmetrical. You could have, like one side brim and then it's, just straight on this side. That's very flapperish, and then do some kind of cartouche or pleating or, whatever. It's not that difficult. Once you decide where, once you mark somehow where you want that brim to go, and you get it in place like this, you can trim it in the back and shape this, make it asymmetrical. You can take the excess from this and, from the back of it where you want to trim. And when you trim, remember, you don't need to face it with grosgrain, but you can. You can take grosgrain ribbon. Remember, we talked about how we stretch grosgrain ribbon with the Sussman iron. You can put it on a plate, on the edge of a plate, and steam it on both sides so that it gets it wider here and then it shrinks in on itself here on both sides. Or you could do the grosgrain ribbon on something like this and steam it, and then that shape could easily go on the outside of your hat. Or some people just like the beauty of the raw edge. I mean, that's certainly easy enough. Start looking at felt hats, because there's all kinds of designs that you can do with this brim. You can also, Denise Dreyer talks about how you could take some of this flared section that you cut off. If you have a body instead of a hood, you'll have more that you can cut off and pleat. You can pleat it. I mean, look at this. Just pretend like this is a wider section of felt, because you cut it off of the hood of a body. The body is one of these that has a really big skirt on it. The hoods have hardly any skirt on it. So if you have a body, then what you trim off of that would be wider, but you can take and create pleats in it. And again, don't let the push pins get too close. Or take a wet cloth and put an iron over top of this. You could steam it. I turned this off earlier, but between holding it down with your hands and with a damp rag or a cloth and just steaming it, you can get those pleats. This steam isn't very hot now because I turned it off. That's why it's not burning my hand. Thank goodness. And then you can stitch that down with a sewing machine, or you might stitch it along here and just have those pleats fan out. That could be kind of neat. There's just so much you can do. Now, we didn't talk about flaring the felt. We talked about how when you pull on it this way, it shrinks. But let's not do it on Jacqueline's, because she might have another design in mind for that. Okay, so we talked about how to shrink the felt, but let's pull this. Let's take a section and steam it. And I've got to do it on the edge of the table because we've got excess here. This would be if you want to do this to the brim part, or if you want to stretch out the bottom of your hood to create some kind of flared high brim of some sort. Hold on, gang, we got to fill it up with water. Okay, we're back. We just filled up the steamer again, and we're going to take this, and I'm going to pull it horizontally to show you how it will flare. When you pull it vertically, it shrinks, but pulling it horizontally gives you a whole other realm. I mean, you do have to use some strength. It's not like buckram, which kind of, moves all over the place when it's wet. And you do have to kind of pull on it. And it's good to get it wet on both the top and the bottom. Yeah, Chihuahua. Woo! Okay. This doesn't feel to be as high quality a felt as what Jacqueline's felt was. But it is stretching. It just doesn't seem to be wanting to stretch as much. But you can see that it is stretching more. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's actually starting to create a bit of a wide brim, right? Although I have to say, this takes a lot of elbow grease. Patience is a virtue. That's one way you can create more of a brim, by just pulling on the outer edge. And you would want to be pulling it vertically to get it to get as close to the block as possible. And then, pull this other part, just stretch it horizontally to make the most of a curved up brim as you can get. Well, one thing that she talks about is making pleats horizontally in the book, and that might be something that you would be interested in doing. So that she has horizontal pleats going this way. But say you want a pleat right here, about halfway up. And I don't think that she actually uses an elastic band for this, but I'm thinking that maybe an elastic band will keep me honest and even. So if you've got this positioned like this, and then you put some push pins in here to keep this anchored down, you want to keep your push pins at the top so that you can kind of control the felt as it's sitting on the block. And then take this And I'm taking it to the edge of that elastic band. That's why I think having the elastic band, I'm to the bottom edge of the elastic band. And then steam that. And you can also, as you're steaming it, because this felt, like I say, is not as, it doesn't seem to be as nice as Jacqueline's. You can also, you know, crease that with your finger, as long as you don't burn yourself. Ah, Chihuahua. You know, I bet there's some great YouTube segments out there already that show all kinds of felt steaming that you might want to look for. I'll try to be on the lookout for them too. But then pull this back down. And you've got one pleat. Of course, you want to make sure that it's even. I'm feeling it with my finger. And then what do you want to do? I mean, that could be neat. You could have this little flare and, you know, just have this little top part, and then, you know, that could be really darling. Mm-hmm. But then again, you want to crease that crease that you just, you know, you did the bottom crease, now you need to do the top crease. And just keep pushing it with your finger. Yacha. Oh, yeah.
Don't die.
Oh, I'm kind of loving this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of thinking, ooh.
Wear it out. It matches.
Yeah. I should probably steam this. Oh, I didn't really do much steaming up here. It's falling short of the glory of God, but I mean, I was doing this too quickly. But you guys get the picture, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to cement that in with my thumb as it's being steamed. Oh, I love it. I've never done one like this before.
Oh, really?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Maybe in the dark ages, and I just don't remember. Okay, so I'm going to take this off. Look at that darling thing.
Oh, that's nice.
Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you guys love it?
Mm-hmm.
I just know if everybody were here, they would all be clapping. And that's what I'm imagining. Everybody's clapping and saying, yay. I really did need to spend more time on this top part. I didn't really do that very much. But what a oh, I can't wait to put this one on. And remember, we had pulled this out. This is flaring a little bit more than it would have if we had not. This is the center back. If that isn't darling, I don't know what is. Oh, and it goes with my outfit.
Yeah, yeah.
But look at how chic that looks. I mean, and it's just, you know, the felt will do the work for you. This is your reward for all your traumas with the sailor hat and the turban and the wireframe. The felt hat is the easiest one. As long as you have your trusty steamer, either the steamer or the Jiffy steamer, and as long as you can, you know, have an imagination to run wild. We could take and do some trim on here. I mean, I could see all kinds, you know, felt trim. And, you know, sometimes people use some of their ribbon trim or their ribbon flowers to decorate their hats as well. Remember that the traditional idea is that, and maybe I've told you guys this before, but you wear your felt in the fall with feathers, in the fall and winter. And you wear the straw in the spring and summer with flowers. Felt and feathers, straw and flowers. Now it's traditional. I mean, nowadays people break all kinds of rules. But look at the inside. Isn't that great? And you know, this is probably going to keep its shape even without sizing. But if you really were concerned about it, you could run a machine stitch along this. You know, there was a milliner that I knew at one point who said that the best felt hats are fur hats, using a mixture of camel or rabbit or squirrel. If you mix fur in with the wool felt, it creates wider distances, and so it's more pliable and easier to work with. And she always said that the best hats were fur felt hats, and a sign of quality was if you could take a hat like this out of fur felt, put it on the ground and step on it and pull it back up and it would keep its shape. So I'm hesitant to do that with this one because this is not expensive felt by any means, but you can see how darling it is, and I think that's a good place to end. Thank you for joining us.